In this video, we're going to discuss, in addition to the 5 traditional branches of philosophy, some other philosophies that you might think of as being similar to twigs or offshoots from those big main branches. Starting off at the top of the list, we have philosophy of mind, which asks, how does the mind work? Is the mind just the brain? Or is the mind a divine soul? These might be questions asked under the heading philosophy of mind. Philosophy of language asks somewhat abstract, obscure, or esoteric questions such as, what is the meaning of meaning? We won't focus on that area of philosophy very often. It's a little too advanced for our introductory material here. Philosophy of science we will be discussing, especially later in the course as we move chronologically towards the 20th century. It asks questions like, how does science work and what criticisms can be made of science? We'll focus more on that later. Philosophy of technology we won't get to deal with as much, and so I'll give 1 or 2 quick examples today to get our minds thinking in that style. One of the questions that philosophy of technology could ask is, how does technology impact our lives? To make better sense of this, an example is helpful, and examples are always beneficial in doing and writing philosophy. Look for them as you read our philosophy excerpts and selections this semester. One example we could give is a common one in our society about whether guns kill people or people kill people. That's actually a question of the philosophy of technology, or the ethics of technology, perhaps. It certainly also has a political ramification as well. I would suggest, especially as you're writing your papers, term papers, for the end of this semester, you not use the phrase, guns don't kill people, people kill people. That statement is what is called a platitude, and you should take down a definition for what a platitude is. A platitude is something nice that people say that doesn't mean a lot. That's a simple definition that works. The idea that guns don't kill people, people kill people, is a platitude. It's a simple idea, but it doesn't mean a lot. And there's a reason why. That reason is that people kill people with guns quite often and very effectively. Therefore, the slogan, guns don't kill people, people kill people, is trite or cliche. Let's ask an even more interesting question under the rubric of philosophy of technology now. That question is, are guns immoral or evil? By itself, that sounds like a very biased question even to ask. And lots of people would answer in the negative. No, they are not evil or even immoral. They're just a tool. And they can be used in many different ways, for hunting, for example, or for self-defense. So let's table that question just for a moment and move to a different one. Is a nuclear bomb immoral or evil? Perhaps with that one, there would be a greater percentage of my students who might be willing to answer in the affirmative. Yes, nuclear weapons capable of vaporizing hundreds of thousands of men, women, and children in an instant are immoral. However, if we answered no to the first question and yes to the second question, we might be overlooking the fact that many, many, many more people have died at the wrong end of a gun than to nuclear weapons. So, if guns are immensely more deadly, historically, than nuclear weapons, perhaps there's not as good a reason to suggest one is different or that different than the other. But I'll leave you to debate that on your own. And we'll move on. Environmental philosophy is a niche, new area of philosophy. It asks questions like, what is ethical regarding our interaction with the non-human environment? And a variety of other questions of that sort. But we won't bother going into any detail on that now. Instead, I will spend some more time trying to make sense of feminism in the context of philosophy. Feminism is philosophical. It grows out of the history of philosophy. And we'll be dealing with it this semester repeatedly and constantly throughout the course. First off, and you should take detailed notes on this, feminism offers a critical perspective. To use the language or vocabulary we introduced earlier this semester, feminism provides a critical epistemology, or a way of knowing. It corrects for a blind spot that philosophy has had for nearly its entire history. Up until the late 18th century, when you examine the written record or recorded history, it would seem as if the only people who have ever had anything worthwhile to say or any worthwhile ideas were men. This turns out to be myopic. as if the entire recorded history was staring out with one eye closed. Feminism allows us to view the world with two eyes, with depth. But that's just an analogy for the value of a different perspective that feminism, as a type of philosophy, has given to what in a broader context we call Western philosophy. Secondly, those feminist authors who provided a literary history we now call feminist considered themselves to be doing philosophy. They were engaging with ideas, engaging with ethics, engaging with politics, and engaging with the history of philosophy. So, feminism is not people who write comments online like all men should be killed. That is not feminism. It's not even inspired by feminism. If anything, it's a misunderstanding or misinterpretation of feminist philosophy. But it's easier to see that once we have a real understanding of what feminism is. Feminism does have a literary tradition that we will engage in through authors like Mary Wollstonecraft, Simone de Beauvoir, J.J. Thompson, and Val Plumwood. But we can go into even more depth right now at the outset, since we won't have an opportunity to return to issues of feminism in specific detail until the end of our chronological discussion. Let's start off with what are called the three waves of feminism. The first wave of feminism is usually called the women's suffrage movement. And it was merely the desire for women to achieve the right to vote. The idea that women should have a voice or participate in politics is less than 100 years old. The idea is older. The actuality is recent. If you think women should have the right to vote, or especially as a woman, you appreciate the right to vote, you already are a feminist, whether you realized it or not. The second wave of feminism, sometimes just called second wave feminism, is often called the women's liberation movement, and is often associated with the sexual revolution of the 50s and 60s and into the 70s. This is when birth control became widely available in the form of the birth control pill, which separated sexuality from biological reproduction. this turns out to, in actuality, be a technological development that made a social, cultural, ethical, and political transition possible. If first-wave feminism deals with the right to vote, second-wave feminism has sometimes been characterized as the idea that women should be considered superior to men. That idea is inaccurate. However, there is an interesting thought experiment that we can engage in to think through the possibility of a female-dominated society. Imagine a world in which every single president for the past 250 years was a woman, where Congress was between 90% and 100% staffed by women, and where the Supreme Court was exclusively made up of women. 9 women on the Supreme Court. If, as a male, you might be tempted to say, but I would be discriminated against in that society on the basis of my gender. Bingo! You've understood. That is likely what it is like already in our male-dominated society, where women are right now discriminated against on the basis of their gender. Now, you might be tempted to say, again, especially as a male, surely it's not that bad. Well, let's think through some of the ways in which perhaps it is. Take another example, a hypothetical or thought experiment, to make sense of the types of different treatment that women face in our society as opposed to men. If you are male, ask yourself, would I be comfortable going for a jog at 11 p.m. at night in my neighborhood? What about a jog with my shirt off, especially if it's hot? I can go bare-chested and no one bats an eye. But if the roles are reversed and I'm female, merely going for a jog at 11 o'clock at night, whether I remove my top or not, could be life-threatening. I use this as the tip of the iceberg for not only what people have begun to call rape culture, but the varieties of sexism, discrimination, and oppression that women do face, whether we as men realize it or not, in our society regularly. While rape is an important issue that we should return to later in the semester, and will, there are others that I'd merely like to mention today before the end of this video. Issues like pay equity, or what people call the wage gap. And it's worth noting that first off, such a thing does exist. Secondly, it is a major issue. And thirdly, that this issue compounds with issues of racism. So that where a white woman might earn 77 to 82 cents for every dollar a white man makes, a black, Latino, or Asian woman might earn even less than that, comparatively. And there are various reasons why the pay gap exists. One would be both pregnancy and discrimination against women who may become pregnant, who are less likely to be hired, less likely to receive a raise. Through indirect forms of discrimination at work, not only varieties of objectification and outright sexism, both from fellow employees, supervisors, and often customers. For example, over the years that students have told me about their experiences, many women have told me that they should, quote, wear a low-cut shirt to work if they desire to move up in the company. That waitresses have been subjected to forced flirting with customers for better tips, as well as being groped, spanked, slapped on the butt, inappropriately touched by customers, and told not to worry about it. And these examples not only add up in the workplace, but add up over a lifetime, to the point that women are made quite often in our society and around the world to feel as if they are nothing more than their bodies or nothing more than their appearances. That beauty is the only thing that matters for a woman. And this idea is reductive. Emotionally as well as socioculturally damaging to human beings, which women are. The idea that women's value is exclusively found in their external appearance instead of their intellect is limiting. And it's not just women who suffer from these social gender roles and stereotypes, but men as well. The idea that boys don't cry, that men are not emotional, or that men are not caretakers, or are effeminate if they are. These ideas, pointed out from feminist philosophy, we can understand to be limiting, reductive, and damaging to men as well. And this takes us up to the third wave of feminism, which is where feminist philosophy and literature is today, which is the idea that no one should have to be merely what society wants them to be, but everyone can decide what they want for themselves out of life and what sort of life they want to live. And in this way, feminism has been more open and advocating for the LGBT community: lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender. So, in conclusion, regarding feminism, there is an idea that someone may be a feminist, but they'll say, "I'm not a radical feminist." But what is radical feminism? In the early part of the 20th century, the idea that women should vote was radical. In the mid-20th century, the idea that women could be in charge of their own sexuality and reproductive lives was radical. In the late 20th century, the idea that a woman could love another woman or a man could love another man was radical. So that being radical doesn't mean anything wild or crazy. It's only wild and crazy compared to an imagined conservative nostalgia for quote-unquote traditional values. And probably little else than that. We'll finish off this video with a brief look at philosophy of religion and philosophy of self, asking simple questions like what is the nature of religion, what wisdom do the world's religions have to share, and philosophy of self, a new term for something that philosophy has done since its outset, perhaps best expressed by asking questions like, who am I? Am I primarily an animal that can speak, or an immortal soul trapped in a mortal body? These might be ways to ask questions under the rubric of philosophy of self. We'll pick up in the next video with a discussion of the relationship between philosophy and science historically.